The chamber of the Galactic Council was the biggest room that any living creature had ever sat inside. It was so wide that the far wall disappeared into a soft haze. The ceiling was so high that small clouds formed near the top on humid days. 17 species had seats in that room. They had argued in it, made deals in it, and signed treaties in it for over 400 years. Nothing had ever surprised them the way the morning's report did. The alert came in just before the council was supposed to discuss grain routes in the outer ring. A sensor station near the HFY belt, a wide stretch of unclaimed space sitting between human territory and the rest of the galaxy, had picked up movement. Not a ship. Not a patrol. A fleet. And not a small one. Ambassador Velorith of the Dravery stood at the center podium and read the numbers aloud. His voice was steady, but his 4 hands were not. The fleet contained over 300 warships. Behind those were cargo vessels, fuel tankers, construction ships, and medical craft. The total count was close to 900. They had appeared at the edge of the HFY belt like a wall, and they were holding position. The chamber erupted. Every delegate spoke at once. Some stood. Some moved toward the exits to send emergency transmissions to their home governments. The Lorraine observers, who never spoke during open sessions, leaned toward each other and exchanged something in a language too quiet to hear. OSS, the Cythery delegate, raised one long pale arm and called for quiet. OSS was not known for making noise. The chamber listened. OSS asked one question. He asked what humanity's record looked like when it came to stopping once it had started something. No one answered right away. The council's senior data keeper, a nervous creature named Beale, pulled up the human military file. Beale had never needed to open it before. The file was large. Beale scrolled through it for a long moment, then looked up and said, quietly, that the record was not encouraging. Far away, on the bridge of the human flagship sitting at the edge of that same belt, Commander Dale Harmon was drinking cold coffee. Dale was a big man. Wide shoulders, short hair going gray at the temples, hands that looked like they had done real work before they ever touched a command console. He was from a small town in Ohio where the winters were long and the people did not complain much. He had carried that habit with him across 3 decades of military service and several 100 million miles of space. He read the readiness report from his fleet, made a small note in the margin of one page, and handed it back to his aide. Then he looked out at the stars through the wide viewport and finished his coffee. Sergeant Nina Alvarez, his aide, was a compact woman who had grown up outside of San Antonio. She had worked for Dale for 6 years. She had seen him in firefights, in peace talks, in courtrooms, and in hospital waiting rooms. She had never once seen him look worried. She had also never been entirely sure if that was strength or something stranger. She handed him a new cup of coffee and told him that the council had acknowledged receipt of their message. Dale nodded. He asked if they had responded. Nina said no, not yet. Dale said that was fine. They had time. The message they had sent was short. It had gone out 3 hours earlier, signed by Dale and countersigned by Admiral Grace Owens, who was commanding the 2nd Carrier Group 20,000 kilometers off the flagship's port side. The message said that humanity was formally requesting recognition of territorial claim over 7 star systems within the HFY belt. It named the systems. It gave coordinates. It was polite. And at the very end, it gave a time and date by which the council needed to respond. After that time, the message said, the fleet would begin moving into the belt to begin operations. It was not a threat. Dale had been careful about that. It was a statement of intent, the way you might tell a neighbor that you were planning to put up a fence next week. The fence was going up. The only question was whether the neighbor wanted to talk about the property line first. Back in the council chamber, that message was being read aloud for the 3rd time. Each time it was read, the room got a little quieter. Velorith asked if this was a negotiating tactic. He had seen species posture before. He had seen large displays meant to frighten and then dissolve once a small concession was made. He wanted to believe this was that. The Ithari delegate, an old diplomat named Cray who had been in his seat for longer than most of the current delegates had been alive, said he was not sure it was. He said the tone of the message was wrong for a bluff. Bluffs had a particular shape to them. They were loud, or dramatic, or they made references to consequences that were slightly too specific. This message had none of that. It sounded like a schedule. OSS agreed with Cray. OSS said the most frightening thing about the message was not what it contained. It was what it did not contain. There was no anger in it. No grievance listed. No history of wrongs that humanity wanted corrected. Just a request and a deadline. The data keeper Beale quietly flagged something and sent it to Velorith's screen. Velorith read it, then read it again. The fleet at the Ashren Belt was not humanity's main force. According to the file, the ships currently in view represented somewhere between 12 and 15% of humanity's total active military capacity. The rest were deployed elsewhere, running patrols, protecting shipping lanes, or sitting in reserve at bases spread across human space. Velorith read that number 3 times. Then he set the screen down and looked out at the chamber, at 16 other species all talking at once, all trying to find the angle, the weakness, the part of this that could be managed. He was not sure there was one. On the flagship, Dale got a second message. It was from Admiral Grace Owens. It said simply, "Council lights are going crazy over there. Lot of traffic." He smiled at that. Grace had a gift for understatement. He wrote back, "Good. Let them talk." He set down the comm unit and looked at the stars again. The Ashren Belt was beautiful up close. Nobody had really looked at it carefully before, because nobody had claimed it. That was the thing about unclaimed space. It just sat there, waiting, full of planets and minerals and possibilities, until someone finally showed up and paid attention. Humanity had decided to pay attention. The Council had until the timestamp to decide what it wanted to do about that. Dale was not worried about which way they would go. He had read enough history to know that when you showed up calm, prepared, and in large numbers, the conversation usually went the way you needed it to go. He asked Nina to get him something to eat. She brought him a sandwich from the galley and did not comment on the fact that 900 human ships were sitting in deep space while their commander ate lunch and waited. That was the thing about Dale Harmon. He made the impossible look like an afternoon. He had worked in the Galactic Council's research division for 11 years. She had written papers on trade agreements, diplomatic treaties, and the history of border disputes between species who had since made peace and forgotten what they were ever fighting about. She was good at her job. She was calm, organized, and careful. She had never once, in 11 years, been asked to do anything that made her feel afraid. That changed the morning she received the assignment to compile a full intelligence file on human military history. She sat down at her desk with a cup of warm liquid she liked and opened the file. By the time the liquid was cold, she had not moved. By the time someone knocked on her door to ask if she was coming to the afternoon briefing, she had read enough to know that she was not going to be particularly useful in any briefing for the rest of the day. The file was enormous. Centuries of it. Wars fought on a single planet, between groups of the same species, using weapons that were primitive by any galactic standard, and yet the numbers were staggering. Tens of millions dead in some conflicts. Hundreds of millions in others. And every time, some part of humanity had kept going. Some part had reorganized, resupplied, and continued. There were a few cases where it looked like a group had been completely broken, and then 10 years later it came back in a different shape, with a new name, and started again. He sent a message to Captain Lou Caraway. Lou was a human liaison officer attached to the Council. He was there to help with communication, translation, and what the Council generously called cultural orientation. He was a medium-sized man with brown hair and an easy way of sitting in chairs that made it look like he was always slightly on vacation. He arrived at Fee's office 20 minutes after her message and found her staring at a screen full of numbers. He looked at the screen. He looked at her. He asked if she was all right. She said she was fine. She said she had some questions. He pulled up a chair and said she could ask anything she liked. She asked him about the early wars. The ones on the single planet, before humanity had reached space. She asked him how it was possible for a species to keep fighting when the losses were so large. She had worked with data all her life. She understood numbers. But these numbers did not behave the way she expected. They did not go down and stop. They went down and then came back up again. Lou thought about it for a moment. He said it was not that complicated, really. He said humans had a tendency to look at a bad situation and decide it was temporary. Even when it was not. Even when every reasonable reading of the facts said that the situation was going to stay bad for a long time, there was usually some part of the human population that decided this was fixable, and started working on fixing it. He said sometimes they were wrong. He said sometimes things did not get fixed. He said but sometimes they did. He asked about the weapons. The ones humans had built that could destroy an entire planet's surface. She had seen the entry in the file. She had read it 3 times to make sure she understood it correctly. Humanity had built weapons that could end all life on a planet. Not damage it. End it. Lou nodded. He asked why they had not used them. Lou leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said that the answer was a little uncomfortable. He said the reason humanity had not used those weapons was not entirely because of conscience, though conscience was part of it. The bigger reason was that both sides had them. And both sides understood that if one side fired, the other side would fire back, and neither side would be left to feel good about having started it. He said humans had called that idea mutual assured destruction. He said it like it was the name of a bad neighborhood that everyone had learned to avoid. Fee stared at him. He said it in a cheerful way. That was the part she could not reconcile. He was describing something that should have felt enormous and dark, and he said it the way someone might explain why they always wore a coat in winter. It was just how things worked. She pulled up the current fleet data. She showed him the numbers from the HFY belt. She asked him to explain the logistics. Lou leaned forward and looked at the screen. He walked her through it methodically. 300 warships was the combat layer. Behind that were the support vessels, the fuel ships, the medical ships, the construction equipment. He pointed at the construction vessels specifically. He said those were the ones people always forgot about. The warships got attention. But the construction ships meant that humanity was not planning a raid. It was planning to stay. He asked how long they could sustain operations with what they had brought. Lou said conservatively, 5 years. Probably longer with resupply runs. He asked if this was humanity's main fleet. Lou paused. Just for a second. Then he said no. He said this was a regional deployment. He said the main fleet assets were allocated to other areas. The room was very quiet. Fee looked at her screen. She looked at Lou. She asked him, carefully, what percentage of humanity's total military capacity was currently sitting at the HFY belt. Lou thought about it. He said somewhere around 12 or 13%, give or take. Fee wrote a number on a piece of paper. She showed it to him. She asked if that meant the rest of humanity's military, which was to say roughly 87% of it, was somewhere else right now. Lou said yes, that was about right. Fee thanked him for his time. She waited until he left. Then she opened a message and wrote to Ambassador Velorith. The message was 4 sentences long. The subject line was simple and direct. It said, "We may have misunderstood the scale of this." She sent it. Then she went back to the file and kept reading, because she was thorough, and because she had a feeling she had not yet gotten to the part that would really keep her up at night. She was right. Cray had been a diplomat for longer than most species lived. He had walked into rooms where wars were about to start and walked out with agreements that held for decades. He had sat across from leaders who were angry, leaders who were scared, and leaders who were lying, and he had found the thread in every case. The thread was always there. Everyone wanted something they were afraid to say out loud. Cray's job was to find out what it was and give them a way to ask for it without losing face. He was not worried about the human commander. He had read the briefing from the council. He had seen the message the fleet had sent. He understood the situation. A new species was trying to claim territory. They had shown up with a large force to make the claim look serious. That was common. That was old behavior. The trick was to give them something they could take home and call a win, something small enough that the council did not lose anything important, and then slowly redirect the relationship into calmer waters over the next few years. Cray put on his formal coat and went to meet Dale Harmon. The meeting happened on a neutral vessel, a council ship that had moved to a position between the HFY belt and the main council station. The room was simple. A table, chairs, a window showing open space. Cray arrived first. He arranged his materials. He rehearsed his opening in his head. Dale arrived 11 minutes later with his aide, Sergeant Nina Alvarez, who was carrying 2 cups of something hot. She set one in front of Cray and told him it was tea from Earth. Cray thanked her. He tried it. It was not unpleasant. He did not know enough about human beverages to know that it was actually coffee. Dale sat down. He did not have materials. He did not have a folder or a screen or notes. He folded his hands on the table and looked at Cray with an expression that was polite and patient and completely empty of anything Cray could read. Cray began with the standard opening. He said that the Council understood humanity's desire for expanded presence in the region. He said that territorial growth was a natural process for any developing species and that the Council had always tried to support that process in a way that was fair to all parties. He said there were several systems in the Outer Ring that humanity had not yet formally claimed which the Council would be happy to discuss. Dale listened. He did not move. When Cray finished, Dale said he appreciated the offer, but that humanity was specifically interested in the Ashren Belt systems that had been named in the original message. Cray nodded. He said of course, and that the Council was open to discussing those as well, though as Cray was sure Dale understood, there were other parties with interests in that area, and any formal recognition would require careful consultation. Dale said he understood. He said he was happy to wait while that consultation happened. He said he had set a response deadline in the original message, and if the Council needed more time, they were welcome to request an extension. Cray smiled. He said an extension would be appreciated. Then he moved to his second approach. He said that the current fleet deployment, while impressive, might be seen by some Council members as a form of pressure, and that a gesture of goodwill, perhaps pulling the fleet back slightly, would go a long way toward making the conversations more comfortable. Dale looked at him for a moment. Then he reached across the table and turned a small screen toward Cray. The screen showed the fleet layout. Cray had seen versions of this before. Dale walked through it without any hurry. He pointed at the combat ships first. Then the support vessels. Then the construction ships. He explained what each category was carrying and what it was designed to do. He explained the logistics chain that kept all of them supplied. He explained the medical infrastructure. He explained how long all of it could run without a resupply. Cray listened. He was good at listening. But as he listened, he noticed something unusual. Usually when a leader showed him something like this, there was an undercurrent. A small edge of performance. A look that said, "See how powerful we are. Be impressed. Be afraid." Dale had none of that. He was describing his fleet the way a person might describe the contents of a storage unit. It was there. It was organized. This was what it did. Cray asked the question he always kept for the right moment. He asked whether humanity was truly prepared to go to war over 7-star systems. Dale said no. Cray felt a small relief. Dale said the 7 systems were just what humanity was asking for right now. He said the fleet was not there to start a war. He said the fleet was there because the Council responded better to things it could see. He said the fleet would stay where it was until the Council gave a formal answer, and then, depending on that answer, things would proceed accordingly. He said humanity was in no rush. He said humanity was very comfortable with taking a long time to get what it needed. He said it the same way he said everything else. Come. Even. Without wait. Cray tried one more approach. He said that the Council had been working for 4 centuries to maintain peace in the region, and that unilateral fleet deployments made that work harder. Dale said he understood that. He said humanity respected the Council's work. He said humanity was not trying to break the peace. It was asking to be part of it. On its own terms. In writing. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Cray walked back to the Council vessel alone. He sat in a small room and looked at the wall for a while. Nina Alvarez, back on the flagship, collected the empty cups and asked Dale how it went. Dale said fine. He said the Council was going to go think for a while. Nina asked if he thought they would agree. Dale said he thought they would eventually realize they did not have a better option. He said that usually took people a little time. Nina said that seemed optimistic. Dale said it was not optimism. It was math. He went back to his readiness reports. Nina took the cups to the galley and tried to decide if she found his certainty comforting or slightly terrifying. She decided it was probably both. The closed session lasted 4 hours. No recording was made. That was the rule for closed sessions, a rule so old that nobody remembered why it had been put in place, though most suspected it was because some things needed to be said in a room where nobody would ever have to answer for having said them. Owen Cole noticed the delegates going in. He was sitting at his translation desk on the 3rd floor of the council building, working through a routine shipping agreement between two species who had been disagreeing about the same harbor rights for 60 years. He had a good view of the main corridor from his window. He watched the delegates file past, one group after another, none of them talking to each other the way they usually did. Owen had been a translator at the council for 8 years. He was a quiet man who had grown up in western Pennsylvania, where his family had been miners before the mines closed and his mother had pushed him toward languages instead. He spoke 9 of them now, plus 4 alien communication systems that did not technically count as language by the strictest definitions but functioned like language in practice. He was good at reading rooms. He was good at reading people. And what he read in the corridor that afternoon was something he had not seen before in 8 years. He saw animals who had just learned something about another animal and were not sure what to do with the information. The delegates came out 4 hours later. Owen watched them from the same window. Several of them moved differently than they had going in. One delegate, from a species called the Marin who normally moved with a smooth rolling gait, was walking in short careful steps as if the floor had become slightly unreliable. Another, from the Ithari, the old diplomat Cray, was looking straight ahead at nothing. Owen went back to his harbor rights translation. But his mind stayed on the corridor. Mira Solis was not in the closed session. She was the human ambassador to the council and she had been in her office on the other side of the building when the fleet message had first come in. Nobody had told her. She had found out the same way everyone else on the council staff found out, from a colleague who had seen the alert and forwarded it without comment. Mira had been in council politics for 22 years. She was a small woman with dark eyes and a way of sitting very still when she was thinking hard. She had been still for most of the morning. She was furious. That was the honest word for it. The fleet had been deployed, a message had been sent, a deadline had been given, and nobody in the human chain of command had thought to inform the human ambassador to the very council being messaged. She had written 3 different messages to the department back home. She had deleted all 3. They were too angry to be useful. What she felt underneath the anger was something she did not let herself examine too closely in the first few hours. It was a feeling that was inconvenient and complicated, and it lived right next to the fury in a way that made her uncomfortable. The feeling was something close to pride. The fleet was there. The message was precise. The deadline was real. 22 years of sitting in that building, being taken seriously by approximately nobody, and someone back home had finally decided to simply show up. She requested a private communication channel to Commander Dale Harmon. It took an hour to set up. She sat in her office and waited. When the channel opened and she saw his face on the screen, broad and calm and slightly tired from a long shift, she did not open with the speech she had prepared. She asked him one question. She asked if this had always been the plan. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said there was always a plan. He said the plan was just bigger than the fleet. She asked what that meant. He said the fleet was one piece. He said the message was one piece. He said the way they were waiting was one piece. He said when you wanted to be taken seriously, you did not ask. You demonstrated. He said he was sorry she had not been informed in advance. He said that decision had come from above him and he was not going to pretend he had been comfortable with it. She believed him. That was the irritating part. She was not sure it changed anything, but she believed him. OSS the Sithari was doing something unusual during this time. He was walking the corridors of the council building alone, which was not something Sithari delegates normally did. He was thinking. OSS had been the one in the closed session to say what most of the other delegates had been reluctant to say out loud. He had said that the fleet being there was not the most alarming part. He had said the most alarming part was that the fleet had been given a deadline and the deadline had passed and the fleet had not moved. It had simply waited. OSS had tried to explain to the other delegates why that was the part that kept the mind busy at night. Any species could be aggressive. Aggression was well understood. Aggression had patterns. Aggression peaked and then it reduced when resistance appeared or when costs got too high. But patience was different. Patience meant the calculation had already been run and the answer was already known, and whoever was waiting was simply giving the other party time to arrive at the same answer on their own. The fleet was not threatening. The fleet was just there, the way a mountain was there. The mountain was not doing anything hostile. The mountain was simply very large and very present and completely indifferent to how long you stood in front of it. Owen Cole finished his Harbor Rights translation late in the evening. As he was packing his things, a fragment of the closed session transcript crossed his desk by mistake, a routing error that sent it to translation instead of archives. He read it before he realized what it was. He read it again after he realized what it was. He sat for a long time at his desk, coat already on, bag on his shoulder. Then he put his bag down, took his coat off, and went back to work. The decision came on a Thursday morning. There was no drama to it. A formal document was transmitted from the council chambers to the human flagship, and a copy was routed to Mira Solis's office, and copies went to every council member in their home governments simultaneously. The document was long, written in the careful flat language that treaties always used, a language designed to say things clearly without making anyone feel like they had lost. The 7-star systems in the Ashren Belt were acknowledged as a zone of human influence. Survey rights were confirmed. Construction rights were confirmed. A formal negotiation process would begin within 30 days to establish the precise terms of long-term occupation and governance. The Council noted that this recognition was made in the interest of regional stability and the continued expansion of peaceful relations. It did not say anywhere in the document that 900 human ships had been sitting at the edge of the belt for 12 days. It did not need to. Admiral Grace Owens was reviewing maintenance reports when the notification arrived. She was seated in her command chair with a cup of tea she had actually let get hot for once, which was rare. She read the notification on her personal screen. She marked it as received. She forwarded it to her department heads with a note that said, "Survey teams stand by for redeployment orders." Then she picked up her tea and finished it. Later that evening, after the day's work was done and the ship had moved into its night cycle with the lights turned low and most of the crew rotating through rest periods, she went to her personal quarters and sat at the small desk she used for private correspondence. She pulled out a piece of paper instead of using the screen, because she had always thought certain things deserved paper. She wrote to her daughter, who was 17 and studying environmental science on the coast of Oregon. She wrote about the stars out near the belt, which were dense and very bright without any planetary atmosphere to soften them. She wrote that the work was going well and that she expected to be home in roughly 6 months. She wrote that she had been thinking about their conversation before she left, the one about whether things ever really changed or just moved in circles, and she wrote that she thought, maybe, sometimes they changed. She did not mention the fleet. She did not mention the council. She signed her name at the bottom and sealed the envelope and left it with the outgoing mail. Commander Dale Harmon held an all-hands communication that afternoon, reaching every ship in the fleet on the same channel. He was not someone who made long speeches. He thanked the crew for their patience. He said the next phase was beginning. He said survey teams would be moving into the belt within the week, followed by the first construction teams to establish infrastructure on 2 of the 7 systems. He said this was going to be long work and careful work, and that anyone who had been hoping for something louder should remember that building something that lasted was harder than anything else they would ever do. He said they should get some rest if they could. He said there was a lot of work ahead. He closed the channel and went to eat dinner in the ship's main galley, which he did twice a week because he thought it was important to eat with the crew. He had a plate of something with rice and sat across from 2 engineers who were arguing cheerfully about a completely unrelated technical problem, and he listened to them argue and ate his dinner and did not say anything about the document that had come in that morning. Nina Alvarez sat at the end of the table with her own food and watched him eat and decided, not for the first time, that commanding Dale Harmon was probably one of the stranger experiences available to a human being. Owen Cole was at his desk early that morning. The document had come to him for translation before dawn, and he had started on it immediately because he was the kind of person who liked to have things finished. He worked through the first 11 languages without stopping. He had a system. He had reference files and glossaries and years of muscle memory that made the work fast. It was somewhere in the 14th language that he stopped. He had just finished a sentence. The sentence, in the 14th language, said something that translated roughly as, "These systems are recognized as rightfully within the sphere of human governance and operation, effective upon signing." He read it back. He read the original. He checked his work. He sat with the translation on his screen and the original on the desk beside it, and he understood what he was holding. He was holding the moment. Not a report about the moment, not a summary of the moment, but the actual document that was the moment, the thing that would go into archives and be cited in papers for the next several centuries as the point where things changed. He sat with that understanding for a while. Then he went back to the 14th language and kept working. He came to Lou Carraway's office that afternoon. She knocked on the open door and waited until he waved her in. She sat in the chair across from his desk, which was messier than her desk and had a small plant on one corner that she had noticed on every visit and never commented on. She said she had one more question. She had been sitting with it since they first talked. Lou put down what he was reading and said she should go ahead. She asked whether humanity had known, from the beginning, that this was how it would go. Whether the plan had always been to arrive in a large group and wait, and let the waiting do the work. Lou looked at the ceiling for a moment. He said he could not speak to the whole plan, because he was not that high up in anything. He said he could speak to the general human approach, which he had seen his whole life in different forms. He said humans had always had a habit of going somewhere they were not expected and staying until the situation adjusted around them. He said it had not always worked out. There were examples in the history file where it had gone very badly. But when the conditions were right, when they had gone somewhere with enough preparation and enough patience, and when the other party eventually ran the numbers and saw what staying was going to cost everyone, it had a way of resolving. He pointed out the viewport. The fleet was beginning its repositioning. Survey ships were peeling away from the main formation, moving in pairs toward the belt. Construction vessels were moving slowly into their anchor positions, big and unhurried. Support ships were spreading out to cover the new operational area like a net settling into water. Lou said, the warning shot that everyone was afraid of was never the fleet. The warning shot was us deciding we wanted to be here. Once that decision was made, the fleet was just paperwork. He watched the ships move for a long time. They were quiet and slow and very large, and they moved with the ease of things that had already decided where they were going. She thought she finally understood. Not just what had happened in the Ashren belt, not just the numbers in the file or the words in the treaty, but the thing underneath all of it. The thing that had made the chamber go silent and the delegates walk differently and the old diplomat Cray stare at a wall. It was not the power. Power was easy to understand. Power had been in that room before. It was the patience. It was the fact that humanity had arrived calm, with a sandwich and cold coffee and a simple message and a deadline, and had waited, and had not needed to do anything else at all. That was the part no one had a plan for. Outside the viewport, the fleet kept moving, steady and quiet, into the new territory that was now, officially, home.